Hello, once again, and welcome to our Spiritism Closer Look Evolution. This is our program number 18. I'm Luiz Lima, hosting on the program through Kardec Radio. We're going to do something a little different today because we have received several suggestions and comments and people asking us to kind of do this big overview of what happened so far in our programs. Like I said, this is our program number 18. We started in March. We've been discussing evolution and all its levels deeply at times. And of course, there's a lot of information. 4 months of information is a whole lot. So yeah, I think it's a great idea to maybe stop the clock a little bit, right? And just go through what was really important. Not because we wanted to say what we said again. No, that's not the point. It's just to really pinpoint and highlight on each of the modules that we studied what's really, really important. I would say almost like coming to the core of all these things. So before we start, okay, as always, we go to our Spirit Trivia. You can always go to evolution.spirittrivia.com and you're going to see the question of the week. You can cast your vote. Once again, we don't collect any information from you, email addresses, IP addresses, nothing like this, nothing at all. It's just all of us discussing Spiritism, studying together. We're all here to learn. What you see here is the question for last week. The question was in the book, Evolution in Two Worlds by Spirit Andre Luiz, right? He explains that. First option, the spiritual and physical bodies do not interact inside the brain. Not true. They do interact inside the brain. And actually, he explains at length how this thing takes place, how it works. Second option, the brain generates all the thoughts, or all thoughts. That's a very materialist point of view. That's not what the book says. And we know that thought becomes at a layer that is above the material level, okay? Third option, C, the pineal gland provides important nutrients to the brain. No, that's not what the pineal gland is there for. It has, of course, as a gland, it has some metabolic functions within the brain, but not to provide any nutrients to the brain. And it has a special, I would say, a purpose within Spiritism because that's how spirit and mind transfer information, okay? This is in very simple words. We already explained that in the past. So we always invite you to go back to all the other programs that we did, and you're going to find all the answers. Here's option D, which is actually, by the way, the correct one. The brain is under the control of the spirit. Yes, it is. All the time. The spirit, or using a better word, because of the point that we are in our studies, the intelligent principle, right, commands the brain. The brain follows what it does what it is told to be doing. That's all it is. It doesn't generate anything. It doesn't have any mind of its own per se. Okay, so those would be here the options, and we put an option E in there. Not sure, but I promised to study Evolution in Two Worlds, Chapter 9. And we put that in because that's where you're going to find the answer to this question. Anyhow, that's from our last meeting. And last meeting was the last meeting of module that we decided to call Evolution of the Brain. So we've done these 8 modules so far, and once again, we want to take a look. We want to take go for like an overview. Let's see what happened in these 18 programs. So here are, this is an image that you see here with all the modules that we have studied so far. Like I said, at length, some of them took us 4 or 5 weeks, some others only 2 or 3. Anyhow, let's go in order here. I'm just going to read them to you, then we're going to make some comments. So theories of evolution, where we discussed Darwin, Lamarck, regular theories of evolutions that we study in schools and stuff like that. Number 2, the creation, how the entire creation came about, how things are formed, etc., etc. Third, a vital principle, which is, you see, when we talk about the creation, we're talking about the creation as a whole, and then we go into life within the creation. And life starts with the vital principle. So there's a logic to the blocks that you see here. Once we learn how life starts and begins, we take that into Earth. How did life on Earth start? How did it, where did it come from? Or what happened until the point that we are as humans fully developed? And then, in order to explain life on Earth, we start with a very simple unicellular organisms and so and so and so to get to where we are as humans. We need to go through all the kingdoms. That's why number 5, we went through the kingdoms. Number 6, races, meaning once we go through all the kingdoms and we understand how humans came about, how human spirits that we are came about, then we're going to talk about the races, how races were formed, how they started in the planet and everything. Then we went to number 7. Number 7, the intelligent principle. The intelligent principle is responsible for all of these things happening. So how did the intelligent principle become more intelligent? And it will continue on its evolutionary path. How did it all start? What happened here? How things were developing. We explained that. And then on the last few weeks, we have been discussing the evolution of the brain, meaning the intelligent principle now is going to develop things, is going to shake things up to develop, right? And keep going on its evolutionary path. And we as humans have this major part of our body, which is the brain. And that's one part that needs to be well understood, because that's how the intelligent principle is going to act upon a human body. So those are the modules that we have studied so far, that we have seen so far. Let's see one by one what was really, this is my personal take on this. If somebody were to ask me, within the module, theories of evolution, what do you think it's the most important thing? And we're going to do this for all the 8 modules, okay? So theories of evolution. We studied the works of Darwin, who he was and what kind of work he did, what kind of path he set to go on its quest for evolution of life on Earth. In a similar way, we had another gentleman, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, which also had the same question. He had the same, how did this thing, is there evolution? Does one species form the other, and so. So they both had the same question, but they came with 2 different lines of thought. Darwin was very based on survival of the fittest. Lamarck was more like adaptation of parts in the bodies of animals and living beings in general to keep going. So they had different answers for the same question. However, both of them, although Lamarck is less, I'm going to put it this way, it has a less materialistic explanation. It's still based on the existence of matter. It's a materialistic point of view. So both of them are. And the thing is, that was a question at the time when we discussed the module. Who is more in line with Spiritism? And we got to understand this, and that's why I consider this to be the most important thing within the module. Spiritism is not studying evolution of species per se. It studies evolution of the intelligent principle, which is something outside the material world. So the criteria to view evolution, what we Spiritists use to view evolution, is not the same as theirs. So a lot of people say, is Spiritism in line with Darwin, with Lamarck, with none of them, with both of them? It's a matter of what are we looking for. We Spiritists are looking for something they did not touch because it wasn't their quest. Doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. They decided to go on a certain path, and we are looking somewhere else because we are studying something different than they were. So the most important thing in this module, Theories of Evolution, is Spiritism studies the evolution of the intelligent principle, not if one species generated the other randomly, like Darwin says, right? Random mutations will cause new species, and so there's nothing random about Spiritism. So for me, that was the most important thing that we had to be aware of. Second module that we studied, the creation as a whole. So we started from God. You see here a little small diagram. So from God, we know two things come out, right? The universal cosmic fluid, or the material principle. The material principle is within the universal cosmic fluid. And on the other hand, we have the spiritual principle. So from God, two things come out: universal cosmic fluid and spiritual principle. Universal cosmic fluid and the material principle within it do not develop per se. Matter is matter. Now, on the left side here of your screen, the spiritual principle, this is going to grow, develop, and go on an evolutionary path. Then we use different names depending on what stage we are. So spiritual principle is right at creation. Is the first, is what we call the simple and ignorant. So this intelligence, spiritual principle, is a primary form of intelligence. It will develop to a point that we then call intelligent principle. It will develop much more later on to the point that we call spirit. All of these things, all these transitions, we explain in very much details. It took us 2 or 3 weeks to do everything. But in general, this is an overview. That's what it is. So if you look at this image on the right side of your screen, the block in yellow, universal cosmic fluid and material principle, that's object of study by science. Everything else, God, spiritual principle, intelligent principle, spirit, it's not their object of study. These are object of study of Spiritism. So you see, we study one thing, they study another thing. And then something interesting, for the spiritual principle, intelligent principle, and so for them to develop, they need to interact with the universal cosmic fluid and or material principle. So you see, for us to study what we are bound to study, we depend on information that comes from those who study the other side. That's science. So that's the beauty of this. Remember, when Allan Kardec tells us that Spiritism and science have to go side by side, that's exactly what it is. We don't have the answers when we Spiritists, when it comes to matter or the material world, because we do not study that. They provide the information for us. We use the information that science has already acquired on certain things, on several things, by the way. And similarly, science will not study God's spiritual principle, intelligent principle, nothing like this. So that's why it's so interesting when Allan Kardec tells us they need each other. One without the other would be, wouldn't be a complete study of things. That's, for me, was the most important thing in the module, the creation. Third module, vital principle. Okay, so vital principle is interesting because if you go back to one slide before, we have a spiritual principle that has to learn how to operate and manipulate matter. But it graduates to a point where it needs to manipulate matter, not static matter only, atoms and subparticles and molecules. No, it has to be able to infuse life in those molecules, in those atoms. And that's where the vital principle comes on. So the vital principle, according to Emmanuel, that's a beautiful definition. It tells us the vital principle is a force. If it's a force, it's not an intelligence. It's something that intelligence or the intelligent principle makes it happen, but it's force. So it's related to the material principle. It's just that when the intelligent principle is intelligent enough, it knows how to use the properties of matter to kind of bring up this vital principle. So the vital principle is this force that makes static molecule, inert molecule, or as we say, inorganic matter, to become organic matter, which is matter with life in it. It's called a vital principle. So number 4, the Earth. So we studied formation of the planet. We went through the entire process, considering starting at the Big Bang, going all the way to the present moment. We spent a lot of time on that. That's a very interesting study. But then, when we look at the Earth going through all this, evolutionary process to become what it is today, we go and look and say, well, but Earth is not the only thing. It's actually minuscule. It's infinitesimal compared to the entire creation. So Earth belongs to a solar system. There are other solar systems that form galaxies, and then we go to clusters, superclusters. So at one point, we're going to run out of names, right? But we don't run out of the universe. The universe is still out there, huge. We cannot even, our brains cannot even imagine how vast this thing is. So we study how the Earth was, in this module, how the Earth was prepared for humans to incarnate on it. So there was a point where the Earth was ready to receive intelligent principles operating organic matter here, physical bodies. Another thing that we discussed in this chapter is outside the material part of the Earth, okay, the molecules and everything else, which is the 12 spiritual spheres of the Earth. These spheres are layers, really layers, okay, of, we could say, dwellings where spirits live. Discarnate spirits, all incarnate spirits live on the crust. When we discarnate, we are going to go to one of these layers that are called spiritual spheres of the Earth. There are 12 of them. We explain that in details as well on chapter 4. And we explain also in details, when we die, where do we go? Do I pick and choose which one of the 12 I want to go to? It isn't that way. So I encourage you to go back to our previous programs and take a look at it. And then we went to the kingdoms. And so we went through, talking about plants, inferior plants, higher plants, same for animals, transitions between kingdoms. But there's one thing, all of this is important, but there's one thing that I think is critical for us Spiritists, because there's a lot of confusion. A lot of times we see people coming to us and asking this, something along these lines. When I was a plant, this, and this. When I was a dog, this, and this. Well, if the question is brought out this way, if it's put this way, there is some lack of understanding, because we saw that before, okay, in our previous programs. It's only, we can only use the word spirit after the intelligent principle achieved a certain evolutionary point. where it now will know how to form a physical body for a human body on earth. So now that spirit got to this point. Prior to this point, we do not call the spirit spirit. We call them simply intelligent principle. So the intelligent principle keeps developing, keeps developing. There's going to be a point where it is so developed that it kind of, if you want to use a better word, kind of graduates. And then the intelligent principle individualizes and will then, each one of these individuals will be called a spirit. So when I say me, when I say you, when I say we, us, we are talking about individualized intelligent principles. We are talking about spirits. There is no sense in asking a question like, when I was a rock, when I was a plant, because that's not a spirit, that's not individualized, that's something else that we already discussed. And then, if we do not understand this, that I'm repeating to you right now, question 540 on the Spirit's book becomes very, very, very challenging. In the answer to this question, this is what the spirits are going to say, and you can see here on your screen. It is thus that everything in nature is linked together from the primitive atom to the archangel, who himself began at the atom. There are a lot of problems in translations here from the original French into all the languages. This is a good translation. This is very in line with what the original French is. Look at the phrase, I'm going to say it again. Who himself, the archangel, began at the atom. This is not the same thing. If my translation was this, the archangel began as an atom. Okay? It would be completely different. Because if I tell you the archangel began as an atom, so this atom was born, let's put it this way, and it was transformed, and he went through a lot of transformations, became maybe an animal, maybe a man, maybe an angel, and an archangel. But that's not what it is. The archangel began at the atom, meaning, like us, we could say that we humans began at the atom. There was a spiritual principle and then an intelligent principle that had to learn how to put atoms together to form matter, organic matter, with the vital principle, form bodies, and so on. So we were not an atom that became this gigantic body of, a huge mass. It's not it. So this is a very important thing, and it has to do with translation. So look at your translation, make sure, go back to the original French, please. When always in doubt, we can always, all of us, original French is free. We can always go back to the original in French and say, let me look at this thing because I'm kind of confused with the language that the translator used. See, a translator is a person. They can make things more difficult or less, not by intention. We're all learning here, please. So go back to the original French. Okay, that's important. And that for me, among all that we studied and mentioned for the kingdoms, I picked this one because I think it's really important, much more important to study, if I had to pick one important thing, right, then study transitions from plants to animals. And so this is really important. Then we went to talk about the races, okay, how race after race, we have a humanity going from several hundreds of thousands of years. And we explained that there was a certain point, because if you think about the human races, before the humans, we had what we call the anthropoids, which are kind of a transition point, a transition living being between the higher animals and the monkeys and apes species into humans. Again, it's not that the monkey becomes a man. Go back to our program. It's very well explained, I guess, hopefully. So after the anthropoids, we're going to have humans as we know today, Homo erectus and so and so. There's going to be a point where the people living on Earth, today we call them Neanderthals. Okay, so they were still very less human, I would say, in appearance. And also their brain was 4 times smaller, and there were some differences, a lot of hair throughout the body. So there are some differences. And there was a point where we had we could understand as a change in the DNA for better. So something was worked out in the spirit world to provide a more advanced physical machine, a physical body that a better, more advanced intelligent principle could use. So if we are gonna have a better machine, we need to bring home, right? We need to bring more intelligent principles. They are more intelligent than the ones we had at the time. So what happened was a transmigration of spirits from another orb called Capella over here. That happened roughly about the year 25,000 BC, 25 to 28,000 BC before Christ. And then these spirits started to incarnate on Earth in different points of the planet. Okay, and they formed 4 races, but 2 of the, in addition to 2 of the races already in place, which were the blacks in the south part of Africa, and the yellow ones in the far east, China, Japan, and so. So these, what we call them, is exiles of Capella. Exiles because they did not meet the minimum moral criteria at the time for their orb. So they were transmigrated here because they were still much more advanced than we were, and they could help us, and they did, by the way, right? They could help us have the opportunity to rework their morality and go back home. Several of them did, not all of them. So in view of these exiles of Capella coming into incarnations here on Earth, a lot of other things take place, develop, and we explain that in the chapter 4, races. And then we spoke about the intelligent principle. Well, in this particular program, we have been talking about the intelligent principle all along, but this particular chapter, we decided to go to the beginning of life, remember, with the vital principle. So now the spiritual principle knows how to infuse life on matter, making inorganic matter organic matter, and they are now called intelligent principle. So this intelligent principle will start to organize matter, organic matter, in a way that things are going to develop. So we're going to have the very primitive forms of life and unicellular living beings, then multi-cell, cells binding together. So we went through a whole process until we get to our days. And what is happening is because the intelligent principle is not matter. Remember, matter is that big yellow diagram in the beginning. Everything else is intelligent principle. So the intelligent principle is going to operate upon matter. Okay, it's going to manipulate matter to form better bodies, more advanced bodies with their perispirit. So the intelligent, on this chapter, what we did talk about was how the intelligent principle starts to create a perispirit from the very first forms of life to modern day humans. Okay, that was all done by the intelligent principle. And the last 4 or 5 weeks, we have been talking about the evolution of the brain. We had our good friend Vanessa with us on a talk last week, wrapping up the subject, evolution of the brain. What I think it's important on this chapter, scientific studies, okay, especially by what I think he is one of the before and after guys at his time for the work he did. He was studying evolution of the brain from the scientific point of view. Okay, Paul MacLean, he was a scientist, and he kind of puts together the brain in layers. So there were, if you go back all the way to the reptiles, there was that's when the first forms of brain that resembled something human were formed. So he calls those animals, they have what he calls a reptilian brain. And then animals develop, things keep going. There's going to be a second layer attached to the top of the first one. If you want to visualize it, you know, a second layer comes on top, making the whole brain, now 2 layers, much better than before, much more capable of doing more things than before. This second layer, he called the paleomammalian brain. And then he said later on, with evolution and so, there's a third layer that comes on top of the first 2. And that third layer he called the neo-mammalian brain. So today's human brain is formed by these 3 layers, not that it's 3 separate layers. It's an analogy, but it was formed with time. And then we take this information, we go to Spiritism that gives us, at length, by the way, similar information, especially on the book In the Greater World by Spirit Andre Luiz. And he kind of tells us about the same thing. He kind of aligns Paul MacLean's ideas with the ideas from the spirit world. And it's a pretty good match. You know, if you look at the picture here, the ideas that Paul MacLean had are in line, basically, with what Spiritism teaches. So, for example, Spiritism teaches that we do have this reptilian brain. We use different names. We don't call in Spiritism reptilian brain. We call primitive brain or initial brain. But it's there, and it's doing the same thing that those animals were doing. It's a brain that accounts more for instinct, territorial reactions. You know how we say, no, you can't touch here, this is mine. Get out of my space here, get out of my place. That's what these animals do, right? They demark territories. So that's done by the reptilian brain. And then Andre Luiz talks about a second layer, which is called the intermediate zone, which is a brain that makes us live the present. We are aware of what's going on, what's around us, at the present moment, what we want to do today, what we have to do today. That's the second brain. And the third one, the frontal lobes, that's what differentiates us from the animals, big time. That's where creativity is. These are things that animals cannot do. We can teach a lot of tricks to a lot of animals. We've seen, every day on television and reading, we see dogs doing incredible things, monkeys doing incredible things, but they do by mimicking what they were told to do. They cannot create. You can teach a monkey how to play a song in the piano if you want. Of course, it's going to take years and years and years, but it's possible. Then when he learns that, and he's a good piano playing monkey, okay, you can tell him, okay, now play another song. He can't do it. He can't do it because it requires creativity. They don't have that ability. That's us. So we spoke about evolution of the brain, and we try to demonstrate that all of our reactions to situations in general, that we react as an animal. For example, somebody comes to talk to us and we don't like the tone that the person came. For some reason, we just don't like it. And then instead of being cordial and asking the person, oh, no, yeah, let's talk, please, let's sit down, we just start speaking words and, raise our voices and roar, and animals do that. So we are reacting to the situation with our reptilian brain. And then the great thing here is, if I use my reptilian brain all the time, or most of the time, I'm kind of denying something that I got, that I acquired by God's grace, called frontal lobe, and I'm not using it. That goes against life. That goes almost against preservation of life, because I get something now that I don't use. It doesn't serve me for anything. All right, so the studies of the brain that we did in this module with the book, In the Greater World, especially chapters 3 and 4, they are phenomenal, fantastic. Do not let this book pass by. Okay, go for it and read the chapters. It's very, very interesting. And it will teach us how to, be more aware of when we are using the reptilian brain in excess, that we should stop and raise our levels instead of just reacting by instinct and screaming at everybody and being mad at everything. No, stop. Let's think about it. Okay, here I am. I'm going to do this and this and this. This is my strategy to achieve my goals, and so on and so on and so on. Okay? Well, that's what I wanted to bring to you today, as this overview of what we did this past few weeks. And again, don't forget to go to our spirittrivia.com, right? evolution.spirittrivia.com. You can go there now and you can cast your answer for the question of the week. And thanks so much for joining us, and I will see you next week. Thank you.